Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head on uatv, and I'm Alice Gerjuk. After the onset of Russian aggression in 2014, the Ukrainian army entered into the first war fought on Ukrainian soil since the collapse of the Soviet Union, poorly prepared and with little training. Having paid a high price for stopping the aggressor in the first years of the war, Ukrainian armed forces are going now through structural reforms. At the same time, bigger economic reforms are being implemented in the country. What are the changes that the Ukrainian army is dealing with, and what remains to be done? To discuss this, we are joined via Skype today by Yuriy Husyev, Ukraine's former Deputy Minister of Defense, who is currently in Colombia representing Ukraine at the International Conference Economic Reforms and the Armed Forces. Hello, and thank you for joining us, Mr. Husyev.
Hello, everybody.
Could you recall briefly the situation in Ukraine's defense sector and also on the front line back in 2014 and 2015 when you worked in the ministry, so the audience could better understand the issue?
First of all, Ukrainian Army in 2014 was almost destroyed by the Russian agents and by the Ministry of Defense before the Revolution of Dignity. And in 2014 to 2015, we've started the complex of reforms in the Ministry of Defense, include the implementation of NATO standards, implementation of new military logistics, implementation of procurement system, which now called PROZOR, and many other things. Actually, I'm today in Colombia to share the Ukrainian successful experience reforming in armed forces of Ukraine here in Colombia, in the Republic of Colombia, with the military University of Colombia. That's why I guess that we did a huge job and we achieved great results during the last 4 years in the Ministry of Defense and the Armed Forces of Ukraine. And now Armed Forces of Ukraine is one of the strongest army in the Europe, and reforms is continuing in the Ministry of Defense.
Could you be please more precise about the achievements?
We was focused on different particular projects and challenges in the Ministry of Defense. First of all, it was procurement system, and the Ministry of Defense was the first ministry which implement the state procurement, electronic procurement system, and later in 2016 we have name of this procurement system PROZOR, and we've saved more than 20 million hryvnias for 6 months as a pilot project in 2015. If you compare with the first half of the 2015 in the same ministry. Second is a complex of implementation of NATO standards in the Ministry of Defense and military logistics. It's very important because NATO standards is very new for the was very new for the Ministry of Defense, because Ministry of Defense was till 2014 some kind of post-Soviet military ministry. And NATO standards help us to implement new approach for military logistics, for military medicine, and for new standards for uniforms, for example. And now we understand that, for example, in 2014, there was helmets from Second World War for soldiers of Ukrainian Army. And now we have a very modern helmets and uniforms for Ukrainian soldiers, and a new doctrine of military logistics in the Ministry of Defense.
But speaking of this NATO standards, what tools or documents or mechanisms does Ukraine use for this reform?
Thank you for this question, because in 2016, Ukraine adopted the Strategic Defense Bulletin. Strategic Defense Bulletin was adopted by the President of Ukraine, and the Strategic Defense Bulletin is a roadmap for reforms in the Ministry of Defense and the security and defense sector. In Strategic Defense Bulletin, we have some roadmap how could Ukrainian Army implement NATO standards, STANAGs in Ukrainian Army. In strategic defense bulletin, we have different streams for implementing these STANAGs in different sectors of security and defense.
Just to explain our audience that STANAGs are STANAG is the standardization agreements, basically NATO standardization agreement.
Standardization agreement which define standards in NATO armies in different countries, member states of NATO. And I'm sure that implementation of STANAGs makes Ukraine closer to the NATO, and one day in the future, I hope we will the member states of NATO.
Well, as far as I know, there are around 1,300 STANAGs in NATO, and how many of them are on the docket for Ukraine to implement?
Good question. I can't say how many was implemented during last 2 years, but we were implemented first 30 STANAGs for military logistics in 2015. It was very new for Ministry of Defense because STANAGs, it's not only about some standards, it's about some business processes, it's about some organizational structures. It's about some approach to the military issue.
So how did the logistics change?
I'm sorry?
How did the logistics change in the defense sector?
Now we have pilot projects together with NATO with electronic logistics system, which could help the Ministry of Defense understand needs from different brigades and to start procurements for different brigades in time, and it means that every soldier, every officer from these brigades will have anything he needs for uniforms, boots, helmets, etc. According to electronic logistics system, like in any other NATO armies. But we have to improve this and to multiply this for whole Ukrainian army, not only for a few pilot brigades. And it will be electronic logistics which could help the Ukrainian army to understand all needs and all storages of Ukrainian army.
Well, also among the STANAGs, there is an aspect that we need to modernize our equipment, military equipment and weapons, basically. How are we successful in this?
Good question. In 2016, Ukraine joined NATO Procurement Agency, NSPA, and this NATO Procurement Agency could help Ukraine to buy modern weapon from NATO armies, member states of NATO, and I know that we have a huge progress in the state enterprise Ukроборонпром. They are looking for cooperation with NATO companies, companies from NATO countries to implement NATO standards in equipment as well. Because we have a huge potential, and Ukraine is a big exporter of weapon globally. But this weapon was produced according to post-Soviet or Soviet standards, and new NATO standards will open new markets for Ukrainian producers and new opportunity for cooperation with different companies from France, from United Kingdom, from United States, and many other countries.
But what spheres of defense sector are the hardest to reform in Ukraine?
It's mentality. I would say it's mentality of post-Soviet generals, which were not ready to change values and mentality, approaches for management, etc., etc. But good news is that now we have a new generation of Ukrainian heroes from ATO zone, and this generation will raise in the Ministry of Defense and General Staff, and now we have many good examples that some young officers became head of departments in the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff, and it's a good news because it's a good transformation of Ukrainian Army. The main difference between NATO and Soviet Army, it's my personal opinion, is values. In Soviet Army, the main value was weapon. If you have a weapon, you are cool guy. But in the NATO Army, the main weapon, the main value is the life of soldier. You have to protect soldier. You have to do everything you could, everything you can for protect soldier and for plan military operation in the most efficient way.
Mr. Husyev, how do you think, how much time do we need to overcome this legacy of the Soviet Union? In values,
I guess we did a huge progress last 4 years, and I guess in next 3-5 years we will have new generation in the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff. We will have new generation in different brigades, and this generation is totally different than Soviet generation. And this generation has new values, NATO-oriented approaches for management, for study process, for logistics, etc., etc. And I guess during next 3-5 years we will have civil Minister of Defense, and we will have civil Ministry of Defense, and very good motivated General Staff with a new generation of heroes.
Now I want to move a little bit onto another big change in the Ministry of Defense. Earlier, only a minister had the right to make decisions, when almost 1,000 people used to work in the institution and prepare documents for him. And now the Minister of Defense, Stepan Poltorak, claims that they have redistributed functional responsibilities. So how?
We started this process in 2015 because it's impossible to have only one person who could decide everything for the huge ministry with great responsibility during war in the east of Ukraine. For example, in NATO, responsibility delivers from the up till down, and many commanders in local level could decide what they should do with their teams and their commanders. It's a good for transformation, because one person can't be responsible for everything. You have to deliver your responsibility. You have to control, and you have to have a trust with the team of the ministry and of the general staff.
Of course,
I guess this tendency is very good for the Ministry of Defense, and I guess it will finish with a new NATO structure of the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff, with different functions and responsibilities of different leaders of departments and deputy ministers.
But how does the system work now after the change?
System is still in transformational process. Reforms still ongoing, and
but should we expect the establishment of some new institutions for the Ministry of Defense, or what should we expect?
Good question, because my personal opinion is we have to improve institutional capacity in the Ministry of Defense, first of all. That's why in 2015 we established the Reforms Office as a special institution for coordination reforms in the logistics, the military medicine, procurement, etc., etc. This Reforms Office was and is out of the structure of the ministry, but under control of the Minister of Defense. And during my work in the ministry, it was under my control as a head of Reforms Council. And we have to improve our institutional capacity. We have to transform Ministry of Defense from military ministry till civil ministry responsible for military sector.
Well, these NATO standards that we mentioned should be implemented in the Ukrainian Army by 2020. Looking at the current results after 2 years of change, how would you evaluate the pace of the reforms? Meaning the tempo. How fast are we in reforming Ukraine's defense sector?
It's difficult to say that we've achieved all the goals, all the targets during these 4 years, but we did huge work, and now we have the most stronger Ukrainian army ever after 1991. But what I'd like to say is that Minister Poltorak said that almost 80% of action plan of implementation NATO standards in the Ministry of Defense was successfully finished. I know that there are lots of problems of implementation NATO standards because of different challenges like lack of institutional capacity, etc., etc. But it's a process. It's reforms, and I hope till the end of 2020 we will have this plan successfully finished, and we will have next level of cooperation with the NATO.
Yes, let's hope that Ukraine will keep on gaining success in reforming Ukraine's defense sector. And thank you so much for this interesting conversation.
Thank you so much, and I wish you good luck and a strong army. Ukraine needs your attention and support.
Thank you very much. We're wishing you luck as well. Thank you. That was Yuriy Husyev, former Minister of Defense of Ukraine. Thank you for watching uatv.